I live in a large city in Canada, where I go to university downtown. I take the land rail train back and forth between home and campus. It's usually a 15-minute walk between the train station and my house, but I need to cut between an apartment building scheduled for demolishment and then a very tiny stretch of trees in order to reach the path that runs beside the tracks. My train station is right next to a recreation facility as well, used for volleyball, basketball, etc. The train is partially underground and partially above ground. I get off at the station directly across from my university. However, it is often quite sketchy, as it is downtown and my city is quite well known for its crime rate. I'm a sciences student and often find myself in the lab until later in the evening. Because it's winter and further north than most Canadian cities, it gets dark extremely early. I usually call my mom or boyfriend in my walk to the train, as I've had several creepy encounters in the past, one of which I was waiting at the light to cross the street to the train when a homeless man approached me and got really close to my face. At the time, my mom was in my headphones, so she heard him say, "You have really pretty eyes." It was almost comedic when my mom said run in the same tone as the song where the beat drops after run. Luckily for me, there were other students present, and it never escalated after he walked away. I just muttered a quiet thanks and shuffled away from him. Everyone who takes public transit in a large city knows that there's your fair amount of homeless and druggies you just avoid eye contact with and continue on your way. Well, this experience I'm going to tell you about was much more serious and a lot more sinister. One morning, in the dead of winter, I was walking to the train in the very late morning. There were a lot of people walking, so I felt pretty secure and didn't pay too much attention to the man in the long black coat and gray gloves that was walking in the same direction as me after the abandoned apartment buildings. I boarded the train along with another dozen or so people. It wasn't until later that night that I realized I probably should have been paying closer attention. I had a very late lab, so I took the nearly empty train home well after rush hour. It was around 8:30 or 9, so it was dark, and there was a decent amount of snow falling already. I got off the train at my stop. A group of young people with the logo of the university that trains at the nearby rec facility also got off the train and were walking to the building in clumps. I didn't notice the man from that morning immediately, because as I started on the path, I was looking at my phone to dial my mom for the walk. I should have been paying more attention, because I didn't notice him until he stepped directly in front of me to intercept me along the path. I looked up, startled. The man was wearing a long black wool coat, gray mittens, and a gray toque. He looked to be in his late 20s to mid-30s and had a closely trimmed brown beard, and brown hair stuck out from underneath the toque. He smiled at me, but his blue eyes looked cold despite. I immediately started running through imaginary scenarios of what to do, and took a quick glance over my shoulder to the university athletes, who were now almost to the rec center and steadily getting further from me. The man and I were nearly alone. "You're very pretty to be out so late. Where are you headed to?" My heart dropped. I really wish I was witty or good at thinking fast on my feet, because all I could manage was nowhere. He acted as if I didn't say anything, and took a step towards me, still smiling that creepy smile of white death with his dead, cold eyes. "I can, walk you home, if you'd like." I just stared at him in horror, and he continued, "You live that way, don't you?" He pointed in the direction of my shortcut through the trees by the old apartment buildings. At this point, it clicked that this man had followed me from the apartments to the train this morning. He knew which station I'd get off at, and which path to wait for me on my way home. All I knew at this point was that I could not let this man know where I live, and I couldn't go home through the isolated shortcut where he could do God knows what to me. Instead, I made up a blatant lie. "No, I have practice." I was hoping my backpack and general university student look would be enough for me to sell it, as I quickly turned away and scurried after the student athletes. As I got to the doors, I turned and looked at the man. He hadn't moved, but he was still staring at me. I've never seen that look in a person's eye before. It was so malicious, and his smile was replaced with a sneer. As soon as I was inside, I darted towards the largest group of people I could find and called my sister, who I was living with at the time. I told her what had happened and asked her to come pick me up. I had a sneaking suspicion that the man would still be waiting for me to attempt to walk home. She said she was driving on her way home from work and was about 5 to 10 minutes away, but she'd pick me up right outside the rec center doors. It was the longest minutes of my life, as I stared at the facility doors, waiting for the man to come in looking for me. But he never did. My sister called me when she pulled up, and I pretty much ran from the building to her car. She hit the lock button as soon as I was in. The drive home follows my usual walking path for a while, but forks off close to my shortcut through the woods. As we drove past, I gasped and pointed out the indistinct shadow of a man lurking amongst the trees. I knew it was him, and I knew he was still there waiting for me. I never saw the man again after that, but now whenever it's dark out and isn't busy hours for commuting, I get off at the next station and walk home from there. As I walk beside a very busy street, even though it's a 5-minute longer walk, it's worth it. I never want to see those cold blue eyes ever again. I would like to share my latest experience regarding people you would never want to meet again in your life. For those who remember the peeping eye story on Reddit about the person who would stare into my house through the peephole, this is a similar experience to that. But first things first, I live with my fiancée in an apartment building on the 6th floor, and for the sake of accuracy, I will repeat the layout of my apartment floor. There are 4 apartments on each floor. The apartments are split into a bubbled area, 2 and 2, each pair having a bubble together. Basically a metal door guarding the 2 apartments, and so on. Good. Now that the layout is out of the way, I'd like to mention the fact that I am a cat fosterer. I take in stray cats and rehome them. Last week, I took my kitty Leela to the vet for her deworming procedure. I step out of the elevator, and there are roughly 10 steps more to make towards the entrance to our building. This entrance is guarded by a metal door, the bottom half, and glass, the upper half, with absolutely no other protection. Basically, any drunk or angry person can just smash the window and invite himself in without any repercussions. So I step outside the elevator and go for the main door when I notice there's this fairly young man, white hoodie, wearing a black cap and a pair of black sunglasses resting on his head. Most important detail, his right eye was swollen and extremely purple, as if he'd just caught a solid punch right into that eye. This man was standing in front of the door, where I can clearly see his upper body positioned to my direction. I'm thinking to myself, maybe he's looking for his keys, or waiting on someone to come out, and that's why he's standing there. I open the door and move exactly 2 steps out. This is the moment where the man engages a conversation with me under the form of a request. "Excuse me, do you have a lighter?" I politely answer, "Sorry, but I don't smoke." I try moving away with my errands. By the time I get to make another step, though, he's already grabbed the tip of Leela's ear, not hard, not pulling, just playing with it, and gives me an ice-cold stare. "Do you want me to pick up your kitty and smash her into the cement?" I'm shocked, but mostly furious, because I'm an animal activist, and I have absolutely no remorse to punch an abuser in the face. I looked at him and asked him, "What the fuck did you just say to me?" hoping my tone and body language would make him back up, and realized what a fucked up thing he had just said. No, he wasn't moved by my reaction. He even repeated it, this time with a lower voice. I said, "Do you want me to pick up your kitty and smash her into the cement?" I did not question this. I didn't know how to reply to such a thing, other than with what I said. How could you ask something like that? "Come on, go away, you're distracting me." Distracting him from what exactly? This is my building you're sneaking around. You approached me, and at this point you're scaring me, mister. But I decided to just move away fast and get Leela's visit at the vet done. I told my boyfriend about it, and he's clearly mad I didn't call the police on the guy, but the police in my country are the type of officers that would more likely arrest the person that makes a phone call, rather than the one whom they are called to take actions on. Obviously, I was afraid they would classify it as a prank call, and that I'd get into serious trouble, so I didn't. I decided to move on with my life and erase that experience out of my mind. Leaving aside the nightmares I had after, I thought we were done, but not yet. My boyfriend works in a hospital, therefore he has day shifts and night shifts. I never had a problem of being alone by myself during nights, even if the neighborhood is not safe. For my fellow Americans to help better understand, it's a ghetto neighborhood, we just have a different word for it. I would still sleep well knowing I'm safe within my own home. So my man leaves for work, closes our door, closes the metal door, and takes the elevator downstairs to exit the building. After 10 minutes he calls me, and the conversation went something like this. "Hey babe, I don't want to scare you, but how exactly did you say that guy looked like again?" "Well, black hair, brown eyes, black cap, and a pair of sunglasses. Oh, and his right eye swollen from a punch, right?" "Yes, why?" "I just met him. He was standing in front of the main door, kicking it with his feet and slamming the glass with his palms. He was shouting at me to open this fucking door right now." "Oh my god, is he there now? Is he trying to get in? Where is he?" "I called the police the second he started shouting at me to let him in. I wouldn't. I told him to call the intercom or use his key. He said he lives at the 10th floor but couldn't get in." "And? What happened after you called the cops?" "He ran away the second he saw me pull out my phone. I gave the officers his description and left for work. Close the door twice and make sure the metal door is locked and turn the key in. Call me the moment you feel something funny." 30 minutes after this conversation ended, my boyfriend calls me to tell me that the officers called him back to let him know they'd found the man that matched our description, but couldn't detain him as he'd done nothing wrong and let him go. Remembering that he said he lives on the 10th floor, I go to the building manager, which is my door-to-door neighbor, and tell her about this experience. I also ask her if there's anyone matching his description that lives in our building. She tells me there is a guy, same age, looks like him, that lives there. A guy that consumes drugs and alcohol all day, whose mother had just passed away a while ago. Now he lives there by himself. After that, we noticed knife marks inside the elevator cabin all over the walls. The lines are horizontal, long and deep lines. We take that elevator twice a day at least, so there's no way you can miss them. I'm beginning to have night terrors and wake up in the middle of the night to sounds at the door. I have the constant feeling that someone is playing with a set of keys outside and so on. It's consuming me because I had such an experience where the metal door wasn't locked properly and someone got so close to almost breaking into my house, if it weren't for the cat smelling the culprit that announced me of an intruder. Now I'm obsessed with the thought that maybe this psycho could be my neighbor, and possibly these won't be the last times we meet him. The bare thought of him walking around with a knife and scratching walls, being outside our door, it scares me bad. If that weren't enough, my boyfriend opened up to me with a similar situation one night when he'd just arrived home from work. He said I was already inside sleeping that night, and he'd come home late, at around 10 or 11 p.m. He'd just gotten out of the elevator at our floor, and only closed the elevator door, when he began to hear a rustling noise, like when you wear a winter jacket on a mountain and move your arms around your body. It was that sort of noise he heard. He said that every time he would stop moving, the noise would stop as well. He remembered feeling as if he'd got out in the moment someone was climbing up the stairs to the next floor, but when he didn't move, that person stopped moving along with him. My boyfriend waited and waited, trying to replicate the sound but to no avail. He told me he waited for maybe 10 minutes, until out of nowhere, right from the middle area of the first set of stairs, some guy came coming down, not up as he'd heard the person going, passed by him and went to the lower floors. No words. He couldn't see his face well, and only after my boyfriend waited around 10 minutes for something. Obviously, now I'm scared that someone's stalking us, or scouting the apartments to see who's not home. I assure you, though, my faithful baseball bat from the Peeping Eye story is still with me, and I will not hold back to smash some intruder's head if my home is invaded. I've told a few people in my life about this incident. I always look back and think about how I should have just listened to my gut. I should have never went out with him or went to his house, but I was 18 and an idiot. This story happened 17 years ago now. During high school, I was a waitress at a small southern chain of pizza restaurants with a buffet. It was super popular and pretty much always busy. The summer after I graduated, a cute guy came in and sat alone in my section. He ordered a beer and I checked his ID. He was 25 and his name was Mike. He was average height, had a nice build, and spiky blonde hair that was pretty popular at the time. He had a northern accent I lightly poked fun at, and told me he was coaching soccer at my now previous high school. He came back to the restaurant a few times. I waited on him, and he asked me out eventually. I felt like something was off when Mike insisted on picking me up from my mother's house for the date. I lived in the country and liked to drive myself and meet in town if I ever went on one. That way I could leave whenever I wanted. He absolutely wouldn't let it go, though, and was so pushy about it I felt a bit uncomfortable. He flipped the script and framed it as him being such a gentleman. I was too young to know how a nice guy really treats a lady, but I insisted on meeting him in town. I had a funny feeling, but I didn't know why. Looking back, though, I understand I was feeling anxious, but I didn't have a word for that back then, and brushed it off. I drove myself to meet him at a little Italian hole-in-the-wall. Dinner was nice enough, and we began to talk about books. Mike noticed as I was going on about Jack Kerouac or whatever beatnik book I was reading. Gods, I thought I was cool then. That an older man in the restaurant was staring at me, intently, and wouldn't stop. The older man could have stared a hole right through me. I asked Mike why the man was staring. I didn't have anything remotely provocative on. I had on black dress pants and a long-sleeved blouse with roses embroidered all over. I'll never forget what that blouse looked like. Nothing too crazy, nothing overly made up, nothing special at all. Mike made a point to describe what he believed the man was thinking, and what he probably wanted to do to me. I don't get it, I asked. Men just can't help themselves, he said, and gave me a chilling look. I felt sicker as he began to talk about the book American Psycho, and how all men had vile urges that were only natural. The way he looked at me, and licked his lips as he recited some of the grotesque parts of the book, at the dinner table, was one of the weirdest things I had ever encountered. Well, not as weird as what happened next. "Do you want to come to my apartment and have a glass of wine?" he asked me, after he changed the subject. I said no, I had to get back home, but he kept pushing and pushing and pushing, and eventually I agreed. It sounded sophisticated and fun, and I had never had wine before, so we drove separately back to his house. The next part goes by pretty quickly. We walk in, and there's no decorations or anything on the wall. I just moved in, he says, in this bare-bones apartment that he kept pitch dark. He hands me a glass of wine, and I felt woozy pretty quickly after just a few swallows. He asks me if I need to lay down. I say yes. I felt so sick and strange, and words became hard to say. He laid me down on the bed, started kissing me, and my arms felt like lead. I couldn't pick them up to push him away. He takes off my blouse and throws it on the floor to the left of the bed. The house was dead quiet. "Make like you're asleep," he whispers, as he goes into an adjoining room. I thought that phrase, "make like," was so funny. Not pretend, not act like. I don't know. I think it's one of the reasons I never forgot that. I laid there staring at my blouse. I couldn't move my mouth. I couldn't move my arms. All I could do was focus on those little roses scattered across the black lace on the floor. I had no idea what was happening, as I could hear him rifle through what sounded like a drawer of clinking metal objects. It sounded like the rustling of tools or sharp, thin things for several minutes. I became afraid for my life when I heard him laughing to himself. Something, I don't know what you'd call it, a survival instinct, fear, anxiety, caused me to shoot up straight in the bed. I grabbed my shirt, and without even putting it on, I ran out to my car, which I kept unlocked in those days. I don't know how I drove home 15 minutes away, but somehow I managed it, and got home and cried. I didn't tell my mom about me drinking, or him taking off my top, just that it was creepy, and I'd heard him rummaging through metal objects and knew I had to leave. I never saw or heard from Mike again. A few months later, my mom picks up my little sister from the same high school I went to and mentions my weird date with the soccer coach to the office lady, as she knew her quite well. Before that school year ended, she informed my mother that Mike had gotten fired for lewd emails and possibly sexual relationships with multiple underage girls. Mike was never charged. He merely moved away, and no one ever heard about him again. I'm glad I didn't get hurt. I learned a valuable lesson. I should have done a lot of things differently, including just telling the truth about the wine. Now I know exactly what happened, and I know I'm very lucky. If anyone does any weird shit to you, please report it. You can brush it off, but you might find yourself wondering how you could have prevented someone else from having that same terrible experience.